And Professor, I know you would like to ask the first question.
Well, Pastor Sunday, first I want to congratulate you on your 17th anniversary, which we witnessed, and it was spectacular. So we congratulate you and your leadership team for indeed a remarkable achievement. But behind every success are some secrets. Behind every success are some hidden stones. It has been said that the secret to walking on water is to know where the stones are, unless the Lord tells you to walk on water. So in this session, we really want to, if you will, take us through, the journey that has brought God Embassy to where you are. Because many are still thinking about God Embassy of 4 or 5 years ago. They don't know that you're in a totally different dimension. But we hope in this opportunity that you will share more with us. But tell us, can you just give us a flavor? Where is God Embassy today?
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome from Uganda, welcome from Mississippi, welcome from Nigeria, and all the other countries where we had people this week. We have people from over 30 countries over the course of the conference. And yeah, it's a good idea and a wonderful thing to have this panel and this interview so that people who might not have been able to be here will still be able to follow us over the video. Thank God for technology. And I think we'll just have this as interaction session. And I will also welcome you to discuss and speak up your mind because, we've all been blessed, and it will be good for us to be a source and a channel of blessing to everybody else. So, where is the Embassy of God today? The Embassy of God is in the third phase of its existence. So, when I studied the Bible in high school, they were talking about the first missionary journey of Paul, then the second missionary journey. I think he never made it to the third one. But we are on the third phase of our journey as a church. The first stage of the journey was when the Lord brought me here 17 years ago. And I just believed God by faith with a lot of fear in between that it is possible to build a mega church in Europe. God had told me that he wanted to build a mega church in Europe, all over Europe, not just here. And I was complaining at that time saying, oh my, if it had been in the West, if I had been in London, if I had been in Germany, if I had been in France, it would have been easier. I would have been ready to go for it. But in Russia, you should know, this is Russia. But God has helped us to overcome that journey and to go through that. But when our church was about 8 years old, we had 15,000 people. So for a church that is 8 years old and having 15,000 people, we were doing well. We were the biggest church in town. We were the biggest church in the continent. I was 33 years old or something like that. And young, being so young, having the biggest church already in the continent at that time, things were going well. But then I began to ask myself questions concerning the Great Commission. And what I discovered was that even though we had all these thousands of people, tens of thousands of people coming to our church, yet I was not fully satisfied. And I think that the dissatisfaction that I felt at that time was the same dissatisfaction that God himself felt. And the dissatisfaction was based on the fact that even though we were 15,000 people, we had a major church, I felt that the Holy Spirit was asking me the question, are you satisfied with just having a church? Are you satisfied? Are you fulfilled by just building a mega church, or there is something more? And I began to search the face of the Lord and seek the face of the Lord, and I discovered that God had more. And what I discovered at that point was from Matthew 28, verse 18 to 20, when it says that, go ye into all the world, go ye and make disciples of all nations. Yeah, go ye and make disciples of all nations. Then I began to meditate on that and pray. That was when I discovered that hey, even though we were 15,000 people, yet the country was not changed. I mean, the lives of people were changed. Lives of people, all these 15,000 were changed, and more than them were changed. But the country itself was not being changed. I discovered that you could change the lives of individuals and not affect, and not have even the slightest effect on the culture of the land. I realized that the culture was not being affected. I realized that the value systems of the country itself was not even being scratched on the surface. It was not even being touched. I realized that just like the country existed, lived before me, it's continued to live its own life. So we are living in parallel worlds. And so we were living the church life, and the whole country was living their life. And even I realized at that point that even if I was going to have 1 million people in my church, even though our city is just 4 million people, even if 1 million were going to come here, still the fabric of the nation, the cultural values of the nation needed to be affected. So that was when I began to think that, hey, my God, that means we have to leave the four walls of the church. That means we have to break forth somehow to where the culture itself is, where the people are. And that was when I began to understand the Matthew 28 thing, that these nations are not really talking about geographical nations, that nations are enclaved in nations, and there are nations in nations. There are nations of people of the same interest and people groups that live by their own life in a nation. So, for example, I began to examine our church, and I began to realize that even though we were 15,000, but we didn't have a bunch of politicians. So that was a whole branch of a whole nation on itself in the country that we were not reaching. Then I discovered that even though we had a lot of sportsmen, sports people in the country, champions, that was a whole sphere of nations that we were not even touching. And then we had other groups. So I began to say, hey, how come it's like that? That there are so many groups in the country that we could really point to. So I began to make a list of the people groups in the country that we could call nations. And I came up with about 200 and something. Yeah, about close to 300 nations and groups in the nation itself, even in the city where I was. And I said, my God, this is what Jesus really meant. We could have a church in this country and say, oh, we have a president, we have preached as a witness, but really not. Because those other people in those other groups, they don't even know we're here. They don't even heard about us. So that was when I realized that the way the normal classical church was built or was meant to operate was that we would just go and cast the net into the river, and then just wait for the unlucky fish to get inside and be caught by you. The way we were doing church was more resemblant to the parable that Jesus gave, that the farmer, who I now consider to be unwise, went and just threw away and scattered the seed anyhow, indiscriminately, without really doing his own work. So I discovered that was the model the church worldwide, the classical church worldwide was operating, was using. So we are just doing evangelism. Anybody who comes is the one we catch. And but those ones who never look at those posters, those ones who never read, who never walk and don't even see, don't even come across those posters, who have a different lifestyle, they never really get to the opportunity to even know where they are, talk less of coming. Or some of them that don't really pay attention to religion, we will never have them. So are we saying we are witness to that nation when indeed we are only touching the lower caste of the country, the housewomen, the workers, just people who walk in the street and see posters and could come to church, or the sick and the needy and all that. So we were not really doing a good job at touching the country, even though we were 15,000 people. So that was at the point when I began to realize that, wow, I was not really carrying out the Great Commission. Wow. The Great Commission was supposed to be about discipling all nations, not just those particular nations that accidentally come in. Because if you are going to wait on accidental membership, then you are never really going to get all. But when we are talking about all, it talks about system, it talks about structure, it talks about the ability to figure out who is all in the first place. And then it talks about targeting each particular one and not really leaving anyone out. But if you don't want to leave anyone out, you got to know who they are, even if they are there in the first place or not. So that was the time when I realized that at 15 2000, I was a failure. A failure because I was not really touching the nation. I was not discipling the nation in whatsoever way. So that was when we began, that was when we moved to the next stage of our church, which was wonderful. See, that was when I discovered the 7 spheres of influence. It was from studying those nations that I discovered that, then I went back to my studies in sociology. I studied journalism, but in the process I also did sociology, I did anthropology, and I did philosophy. So because of all that, it brought a lot of understanding to me, and I began to realize that, my education in sociology and anthropology will help me here. So, very relevant. So that was when I realized that even the communists had taught us that if you want to change a nation, you only need to to touch the fabric, the 7 fabric of the society, or they call it the 7 spheres of society. So they began to tell us, they were telling us, I studied that, but I never related it to the Bible. That was the point. I began to say, hey, what about if I relate physics to the Bible? What about if I relate chemistry, mathematics to the Bible? It was from that point, that stage of my life started. So it was that led me to discover the gospel of the kingdom.
Wow.
Because he said, it is only this kind of the gospel, this gospel of the kingdom, that shall be preached as a witness to all nations. So the gospel that brings relevance to all people, all nations, and that attempts to disciple them and heal the land as well. So it was then that a lot of things changed in our church. We began to teach on the 7 spheres of influence, and we began to disciple and structure the church in such a way that because all those close to 300 spheres, we brought them into 7 groups. Categorize them into the 7 main spheres of life. And we began to work on them. So today now, it is hardly possible that there is any group of people in our nation that is not covered by the gospel. It's overwhelming. That was the stage and the difference between the first stage and the second stage. The first stage was basically the gospel of salvation, healing, miracles, getting people saved, bringing them to church, preaching great messages, getting people blessed, and hoping they get to heaven. But the second stage now was turning those people who've been saved into fishers of men that will go out into the 7 spheres of influence that we had just discovered, and specifically go to disciple them, not necessarily in word, but even where they are outside. And then began to also realize that through that gospel of the kingdom, that we needed to bring healing, not just to the individual, but to the land itself and to the nation itself. So that was when we discovered that it is the old creature that is mourning and groaning, expecting the sons of God, the manifestation of the sons of God. So the old creature, not men. And when it talks about Mark as well, chapter 16, it said, go preach the gospel to all creature. So it is talking about both nature and man. It is talking about both the land and the citizen. And it's talking about both the culture and the nations in that land. So that was the second stage of development.